Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final session, one of the final sessions of the Statewide Preservation Conference. I'm really excited this morning to be your moderator. My name is Martha Werenfels, and I'm a principal at DBVW Architects. We have a great session planned this morning, but before we jump into it, I want to give a big thank you to Sarah Zurier and Julie Roper, who have coordinated this conference and done a fantastic job. I've seen some terrific sessions, and I think it's gone spectacularly well in this new format. So welcome to Preserving Modern Architecture. Our two speakers this morning are Betsy Holland, who's a preservation manager at Historic New England, and Glenn Gardiner, who's a principal with Newport Collaborative Architects, and someone who I call both a colleague and a friend, because Glenn and I have both been practicing architecture in Rhode Island for, I'm not going to say how many years, but quite a few years. And even though we sometimes compete against one another for projects, we've always been friends. So this morning we're going to talk about two mid-century modern buildings. The session again is called Preserving Modern Architecture. One of the buildings is by Walter Gropius and the other is by Pietro Bellewski. So while we were planning this session, the question came up, did these two architects of the mid-century know one another, and did they ever work together? So I'm going to share a single slide because I'm only the moderator. And so I hope everybody can see this slide. On the left, you see Walter Gropius in the left of the photograph and Pietro Bellewski working together. This is a 1958 image from Life magazine. And in the upper right-hand corner is the building that they were collaborating on, the Pan Am building in New York, and of course you can see the Chrysler building behind it. And if your resolution is good, you can see a helicopter that's about to land, actually that's just taken off from the roof of the Pan Am building. It's in the upper right-hand corner of that photograph. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to introduce this session by saying, yes, the two did actually collaborate on a project on the Pan Am building. But Betsy and Glenn are going to talk about individual projects, one by Bellewski and one by Gropius. So we're going to start with Betsy Holland, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that she can share hers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Betsy Holland, and I'm the Preservation Manager for the Metro Boston region at Historic New England. Historic New England is the oldest and largest regional heritage organization in the country, operating 38 historic sites and landscapes in 5 New England states. We engage diverse audiences in developing a deeper understanding and enjoyment of New England home life by collecting, preserving, and using significant buildings, landscapes, archives, stories, and objects from the past to today. Oh, you don't see my...
We do not see your screen yet.
Oh, okay. I'm going to Okay, just a second. I'll have to try again. Okay?
Now we see it. Great.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
Did you hear the first half of that?
We could hear you. We just couldn't see your screen, but it looks great now.
Okay. As preservation manager, I am tasked with the daily maintenance and capital improvements of 9 historic house museums and landscapes. On any given day, I might remove graffiti from a historic brick wall, replace a water heater, assess and research a resource for a future project, gather interior environmental data for our collections team, or deal with pesky animal intruders. The cornerstone of Historic New England's preservation philosophy is to protect and cherish the authenticity of our buildings' landscapes and objects in order to convey their full meaning. Patterns of wear, methods of construction, historic materials, and irregularities of age communicate those uses and changes over time. Because the physical evidence is valuable and exceedingly fragile, We strive to retain all original materials. If in-kind replacement is impossible, we fully document the change and develop a treatment protocol. It is our preservation philosophy and the expertise that I receive from my colleagues that drives each and every decision that I make about the care and maintenance of my properties. And that's me cleaning some graffiti at the beginning of COVID-19 off the wall of the Otis House in downtown Boston. In 2015, Historic New England received a Keeping It Modern grant from the Getty Foundation to develop a conservation management plan, or CMP, for the Gropius House in Lincoln, Massachusetts. The CMP cataloged individual features, outlined past treatments both physically and philosophically, and included relevant historical and interpretive information. The CMP helps us make appropriate management decisions with all elements in a single location, with the ability to expand and update over time. It is the CMP, along with our own project and maintenance database, that assist us in making decisions about the site. In 2020, we received a 1772 Historic Preservation Matching Grant from Preservation Massachusetts for the conservation of the Gropius screen porch. The project included the replacement of the tar and gravel roof and conservation of the screen frames and netting, plaster ceiling, and bluestone floor. It seemed like kismet when I was asked to speak at last year's conference because I was just beginning to dig deep into past documentation and plan for the project. But like last year's conference, our project was delayed and had to be phased due to COVID-19. Thankfully, phase 1 of the project, which included the tar and gravel roof and the screens, has just been completed. Phase 2, the plaster ceiling and bluestone floor, have just begun. This project demonstrates how preservation philosophy and approach to materials conservation heavily influence decisions for treatment of a modern cultural resource. Before I dig into the nitty-gritty of the project, I'll start with a little background info on the Gropius House. Walter Gropius was a celebrated German architect, teacher, and founder of the School of Design known as the Bauhaus School. Gropius directed the Bauhaus from its founding in 1919 until 1928. The Bauhaus School embraced new materials, new technology, and sought to create a new aesthetic unencumbered by historical tradition. Walter, Isa, and their daughter Ati arrived in the United States in the spring of 1937 after he came here to teach at Harvard's Graduate School of Design and Architecture. While colleagues suggested that Gropius find a home among the historic buildings of areas such as Beacon Hill, he and his family preferred the landscape and history of the countryside. One of Gropius's architect friends connected him with Helen Storrow, a prominent philanthropist with land holdings in Lincoln, Massachusetts. In 1938, Mrs. Storrow agreed to finance the construction of a house designed by Gropius for himself and his family. Gropius chose the site on the hill for its excellent views of Walden Pond. The Gropiuses traveled around New England before the house's construction in order to familiarize themselves with traditional architecture of the region. This research formed the basis for the design of the house that helped bring the Bauhaus style to America while reflecting the surrounding area's traditions. Modest in scale, the house was revolutionary in impact, combining traditional elements of New England architecture, wood, brick, and fieldstone, with innovative materials including glass block, acoustical plaster, chrome banisters, and the latest technology and fixtures. Gropius preferred to use standardized materials, believing that modern machines provided architects the opportunity to think less about the burdens of labor and more about what they needed and wanted from a building. As you will see, his philosophy in all its forms presents many dilemmas for those charged with making decisions about the house's care and maintenance. The screen porch was an integral part of Gropius's original design. While porches in the region were usually put on the front of houses, Gropius positioned his own at the back of the house. Walter and Isa considered the feature the best invention in New England and used the porch year-round as a gathering place for family and friends. The period of interpretation for the Gropius house reflects the period from 1965 to 1969, when the house was in top condition and reflected the complete span of interventions undertaken by Gropius. In most cases, repairs to the porch have been related to practical issues rather than design intention. Gropius himself struggled with some facets of the structure, and interventions were a common occurrence. The roof was last replaced in 1995, and the only major restoration of the porch since Historic New England took stewardship of the house was in 2001 as a Save America's Treasures grant. The first component of the project was the replacement of the traditional built-up tar and gravel roof. The existing roof consisted of alternating layers of felt and hot-mopped asphalt with a gravel top coat. It was prone to areas of pooling, inconsistent drainage through the scuppers, and water spilling over the east edge, causing damage to the plaster ceiling. The first major stumbling block for the project was finding a roofing contractor to set a traditional built-up roof. Relatively few contractors have significant experience installing built-up roofing, and those that do have sold their kettles and moved on to less expensive, more reliable membranes. I was able to find one contractor willing to do it, but the cost was exorbitant and way over our budget. Many of the contractors that I contacted also seemed reluctant to work on such an important and historic house. We also considered alternatives such as EPDM, a single-ply roofing membrane, but decided that the gravel application would not have maintained the look and profile of the original. In the end, the decision was made to go with a contractor familiar with H&E to install a modified bitumen coating with asphaltic mastic and gravel top coat. The material is long-lasting, low maintenance, and almost identical in appearance to the traditional built-up roof. When we removed the existing roof, we discovered that the east edge of the roof did not have the same raised wood gravel stop as at the south and west edges. This would account for the water spilling over the east edge, damaging the ceiling. If we replicated the gravel stop of the west and south edges, we discovered that the profile of the roof would have changed significantly due to the uneven deck. Since it was important to visually maintain the same profile, we decided to add a variegated piece of clapboard set back from the edge to act as a new gravel stop. It was just high enough to prevent water spillage and set back just enough to maintain the same profile. New lead copper-coated flashing and scuppers were digitally fabricated in the contractor's shop and attached before the new coating was applied. Despite having the CMP and our own maintenance and project files to guide us, gaps in past documentation made some decisions more challenging. Although drawings exist for the house roof and marquee, none exist for the porch roof. It was not until the existing roof was removed were we able to make decisions about its care. Near obsolete materials pressed us to consider the use of an alternative material, and flexibility was key in considering an unconventional treatment for water mitigation. Even after replacing it, drainage through the scuppers can sometimes still be an issue. After I completed this first phase of the project, we were able to raise some additional funds to obtain a formal assessment, treatment plan, and drawings from our engineers for both the porch and visitor center roofs. Although I am disappointed that I did not have this additional information for my project, I am buoyed by the fact that we now have it for future consideration. The second component of the project was the conservation of the porch screens. The screen porch was originally built as an open pavilion, but Gropius soon realized that screens were necessary to combat the incessant Lincoln mosquitoes. He designed a custom framework for the screen armature so that its design was consistent with his principles of simplicity, geometry, and functionality. The original materials of the porch were copper-bearing galvanized steel frames with electrically welded corners with copper bronze netting and steel lally columns. Like the roof, the screens have been problematic since their installation. Their unusual construction and large size make the netting susceptible to tears, and the steel frames and lally columns rust over time. The original copper bronze netting that routinely oxidized was replaced with aluminum in the 1970s, and the electrically welded corners of the netting were replaced with adhesive, most likely during the 2001 project. When the steel frames arrived at the contractor's shop, Wood frames were fabricated to support their large size during conservation. Although the CMP clearly states that the netting is to match the copper bronze of the interpretive period, the decision was made to replace the netting with aluminum once again due to the exorbitant cost and questionable durability of copper bronze netting. During the 2001 project, a new three-part coating process for the frames and lally columns was developed, consisting of a zinc primer, epoxy midcoat, and urethane gloss. This coating has held up quite well, and the frames needed only a gentle scrape before a new coating was applied. The lally columns only required a coating touch-up at the base. Luckily, the materials for the coatings were still readily available. Since no documentation existed for the type of adhesive last used to secure the netting to the frames, the decision was made to go with ART 401 FlexTech, an elastomeric compound. Although usually used on wood, its flexibility and ability to withstand the elements suited the needs of the project. Although the frames have been meticulously documented and labeled before they were removed, their reinstallation proved to be a major undertaking. The frames had to be assembled as a freestanding unit, then moved into place. They were then screwed into the ceiling and floor brackets, then tightened down simultaneously to bring the frames into alignment. It took a few days and a crew of 8 to get the job done. Despite having the CMP at our fingertips and years of preservation experience behind us, decisions about the care and maintenance of the Gropius House still prove to be challenging. The very materials that make it so special are what make it so difficult to care for. Staying true to the artistic vision and design philosophy of Walter Gropius is essential. With original materials often obsolete or unavailable, we are frequently forced to consider alternatives. Holes in documentation also present care dilemmas. Additional research and consultation with colleagues is an integral part of the decision-making process, and flexibility and the willingness to consider all the options also play a key role. As a preservationist, it is my goal to do the very best for the site. It is an honor and a privilege to work on such an amazing resource, and I can be sure that my care and consideration will bring enjoyment of the site for generations to come. Okay, Glenn, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Betsy. Waiting for the slides to come up. Thanks for that presentation, Betsy. I really appreciated that. My name is Glenn Gardiner, and I'm principal with the Newport Collaborative Architects, Newport, Rhode Island. And I just want to mention that the first thing is that Bellewski is misspelled in the title, so everyone should be aware that Bellewski has a C in it, and it's not the comic actor's name, Belluschi. During my time working on the Portsmouth Abbey campus, I could truly appreciate Pietro Bellewski's talent and vision. You are looking at a view of the restored church taken in 2009. It is located in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and known as the Church of St. Gregory the Great, designed by Pietro Belluschi in 1960, some 60 years ago. The total restoration project cost was over $8 million. The restoration of St. Gregory and the man who designed it for the Benedictine monks at Portsmouth Abbey will be the subject of my presentation today. My sense is that Belluschi is a bit of an enigma to most of you, and I hope by the end of the presentation you will know a little more about the man and his contributions to modern architecture. The Church of St. Gregory the Great stands at the head of the Portsmouth Abbey School campus. This aerial view represents how Portsmouth Abbey School looks today. We are looking southwest towards Narragansett Bay. The church and monastery are in the lower left-hand of the picture and stand at the crest of the hill looking down on the academic quad that cascades down to the Narragansett Bay shoreline. As you see it it is a majestic school campus, much more dramatic than the school I went to. This morning, I will introduce you to key players in the restoration and also describe Pietro Belluschi, the architect, and his vision for the Portsmouth Abbey School and Benedictine Monastery. Finally, I will take you through the restoration process broken down into major restored components. The Portsmouth Abbey School is a co-ed private school including grades 9 through 12. Here we see an aerial view looking directly west with the church and monastery at the bottom of the screen. The photo taken in the late 70s shows Belluschi and the monks' vision for about 70% of the campus complete. The man pictured above the team is Brother Joseph. He represents the driving force behind the restoration, and it should be noted here that the monks who conceived the church take great pride in its stewardship, which makes the project more exception than the norm for modern restoration projects. He led the effort and directed the project team with Paul Jestings, who was director of facilities at Portsmouth Abbey. Paul was a hands-on manager and very capable engineer who, together with Brother Joseph, made this restoration a reality. James DeVecchi was the headmaster. John Brooks from Advanced Building Concepts was the CM. Michael DiMatteo and I were the architects from Newport Collaborative, and we were the supporting cast. To complete the restoration, we needed expert consultants for the major components. Starting at the top, the spire was completed by Advanced Building Concepts, the octagonal dome and superstructure, David O'Day, building envelope, John Lindbergh and Gale Associates, stained glass restoration was William Willett Studios. The Trinity Crucifix, we brought in Howard and Mary Newman, who are local artists in Newport. And then lighting, both interior and exterior, was completed by Barbara Christensen of Light Resource and Design. And the person who made it all happen was Brother Joseph, who controlled the design for the monks. This is a 1999 master plan of the school by Newport Collaborative Architects and an update of Belluschi's plan 40 years earlier. The four noted projects, the Art Center, the Athletic Center, the Dining Hall, the church restoration, were projects Newport Collaborative oversaw and completed during our 10 years on the campus. I've included this residence hall study we completed in 2005 to show the view looking directly north past the campus. It illustrates the original 500 acres purchased by the monks in 1918, including the original farmhouse on the far left, which was designed by Richard Upjohn. The school occupies 100 acres with the remaining 400 leased to Carnegie Abbey Club in the distance. You can also see the Mount Hope Bridge beyond the residential tower on the far left. Now I'd like to consider Pietro Bellewski. These two iconic commercial high-rises were completed at the height of his career, almost 20 years apart in their design, both post-World War II structures on opposite coasts. The Pan Am building was designed with Walter Gropius. The Equitable building was a trailblazing modern design that influenced many progressive architects of the day. The Pan Am building was not well received by critics, and some historians attribute it to the beginning of the end of the international style modern skyscraper, ushering in the postmodern movement. Pietro was born in Italy at the very turn of the century, and he enlisted in World War I and then got a scholarship to Cornell in 1922. Eventually, he moved to Portland, Oregon, and in 1951, Belluschi became the Dean of the School of Architecture at MIT, right around the time Belluschi entered his tenure at Harvard. And he remained head there until he retired in 1965. He spent the next 20 years completing Portsmouth Abbey School master plan, collaborating with selected design firms. He eventually returned to Portland, where he died in 1994. In between the design of these two commercial office towers, Belluschi was master planning the school for the Benedictine monks and designing their new church, St. Gregory the Great. This shows Belluschi's wide-ranging talent and interest in mastering a variety of building types. Unlike the first-generation modernists, Belluschi would be considered a humanist, regionalist, and an architect who liked to collaborate, as he did often. Though the model shown here is for a 1953 $250 million project in Boston that was never realized. It, however, introduced Belluschi to Gropius, who teamed up on the Pan Am building 10 years later. This view shows Portsmouth Abbey as it looked when Belluschi took over as the dean of MIT. On the right is the original farmhouse by Upjohn and the main campus on the water. On the left is a gym and St. Bede's, most recently completed in the mid-1940s by another professor from MIT, Lawrence Anderson. Many of the buildings on the lower campus have since been demolished, and the new campus that Belluschi master plan is off to the left, but outside of the picture. This is a master plan scheme from 1954 developed by Anderson and Belluschi that was ultimately rejected by the monks. The master plan shows one large interconnected complex of classrooms, dining, monastery, and church. The church was a basilical plan that was not to the liking of the monks. After the scheme was rejected, Belluschi spent the next 4 years developing a new vision for the church, monastery, and the school. He found his inspiration on one of his trips to Italy during that period. His visit to San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, provided an example of a church with a central plan topped with an octagonal dome. The inspiration led to a sketch below, which was embraced by the monastic order and set the new direction for the church design. The master plan depicting the church, monastery, and academic courtyard was approved by the monks in 1958 and was built out over 30 years in collaboration with several design firms. The organizational themes incorporated in Belluschi's plan was to position the church on the highest point of the rural landscape, overlooking the school, surrounding farmland and bay. The school was to be comprised of a number of academic classrooms and support buildings bounded by the green academic courtyard. The science building was located at the opposing end of the quadrangle, reinforcing the monks' concept of the mind and spirit. In plan, they stand equally important. However, in section, the church and spirit remain dominant. On the right is a list of all the collaborating firms Belluschi directed from the 1959 to 1988 to complete his master plan. I've included these images of structures defining the north and south boundaries of the academic quad, designed in collaboration with Sasaki, RGB, and Young Brannon. Pietro also collaborated with artists and designers in allied fields from the church design elements to complete church design elements such as Richard Lippold, George Nakashima, and Henry Lee Willett. This is the final floor plan he designed with the monks. The central focus nave with 6 alcoves directly off the main nave, featuring confessionals, and altars. In my research, I discovered that the Church of St. Gregory the Great graced the cover of Architectural Record in 1961 in their edition featuring new church design. Now I'd like to move into the restoration. I'd like to focus with Belluschi and his design for the monks to the process and challenges of restoration of the church. This view is looking east at the church from the academic quadrangle. At this distance, the outward appearance of the church did not readily show the deterioration that was occurring on the exterior and interior faces of the octagonal dome. It is also important to note at this point, many modern buildings like the church that deserve restoration often suffer from structural design deficiencies that hasten their deterioration. This is a view the actions taken by John Brooks of Advanced Building Concepts was mobilizing the site, protecting features that would remain untouched, and staging the dome. A crane was employed to drop the spire to the grade where tapered redwood spire members were removed, refinished, and reinstalled. The metal crucifix was removed, replated, and replaced. Here's a view of the spire being dropped to grade and dismantled. And here's the spire taken in 2009, totally restored. A major objective of the church restoration was stabilizing the clerestory octagonal dome. We relied on the expertise of David O'Day, of O'Day Engineers, to help our team consider creative solutions to limit the movement and sway of the dome structure that was creating unwanted air and water infiltration, damaging the wood framing and stained glass wall system and structure itself. Photo on the upper right highlights the new steel cables David O'Day introduced to stabilize the spire within the cupola. The other photo to the left shows the introduction of white 1-inch black steel cross bracing running the full height of each of the stained glass walls. At the end of the presentation, when you see the interior views of the clerestory, you will find the steel bracing to be virtually invisible. It was a brilliant idea and worked very well. These three diagrams of the dome illustrate the computer modeling David utilized to convey to the monks how the dome was deflecting under severe wind force. The two lower images delineate the X-bracing solution. The upper right diagram shows a deflection of up to 6 inches in a potential hurricane-strength wind. Restoring the integrity of the dome and eliminating water penetration was a paramount goal. John Lindbergh and his team at Gale Associates developed new details and strategies to seal the stained glass window wall. The deteriorated redwood window framing was removed and replaced with old-growth redwood brought in from the Pacific Northwest. Here we see a large old-growth redwood trees prior to milling and transport. The transportation of the redwood lumber delayed the project for about a month. John Brooks's crew was able to catalog, remove, clean, and restore the art glass from Willett Studios by identifying the types of glass to match the existing windows. We were extremely fortunate to have access to the archives of the original art glass studio. The lower left-hand image shows a diagram of the 8 clerestory walls with one of the 8 clerestory walls with the individual pieces of art glass identified and cataloged. To the left is a detailed wall section of the clerestory showing the new steel brackets and new redwood framing. The photo to the right is a corner detail showing the new steel rods and steel brackets in place. You will note the bright colors of the glass. The story goes that when the clerestory dome and glass were complete, the monks were horrified by the brilliance of the colored glass and had Bellewski install a blue glass storm window over the glass to reduce the intensity of the bright colored light washing over the stone floor of the nave and sanctuary. Myself and Mike DiMatteo tried to convince Brother Joseph the sanctuary could be heavenly without the blue glass shading, but he wasn't going to buy it, so we put the shading on. The restoration of the Lippold crucifix was a big part of this project. In fact, it cost close to $1 million. Trying to find the specialist who could dismantle the gold Trinity crucifix, replace the gold-plated wire, and reinstall the sculpture was one of the most difficult challenges of the restoration. Eventually, the monks found a local husband and wife team, Howard and Mary Newman, both artists who possessed the technical knowledge, working skills to restore the sophisticated spiritual sculpture of precious metal that has remained in place for 50 years. The use of polished metal frets give the appearance the arrays are a musical instrument. Here's a view of the scaffolding they had to put up to dismantle the sculpture. Here they are dismantling the arrays. They took the arrays off site, replaced the wire, and brought them back in sections. Here's a view of the completed crucifix sculpture by Lippold, and it's suspended over the altar. Close-up view. Here we have a view of the past the sanctuary into the nave, and then if you look up at the stained glass walls, you really can't detect the steel rod connections that we introduced to provide the additional structural support. Here's a final view looking at the nave, the altar, and the newly completed restored sculpture. You can also see the new chandeliers that were designed by Barbara Christensen, which are very effective. The church was really dark, and one thing that we needed was additional light, and we had to do it without interfering with the views of the octagonal dome, and I think she did a superb job of doing that. Here's a close-up view of the completed Lippold crucifix and how the church presently looks today. Thank you, everyone.
Well, that was terrific. Glenn, if you stop sharing your screen,
Okay.
then we can open it up for a Q&A. I'm going to invite everyone to submit questions either via the chat function or the Q&A. I'll try to keep checking both. We do have a question from Ross Can, which I believe was directed to Betsy, but I think it probably pertains to both projects. The question is it important to put systems back in place even when it is known those techniques are outdated?
I'll start. In terms of systems, we are at the Gropius House, we're fully updated. Everything is modern in terms of the electrical, plumbing, heating, and air conditioning. But for the materials, usually we try to replace in kind, even if maybe they don't work as well as they could, even if maybe they're outdated, because we really want to keep things the same as Gropius's intention. So sometimes if it really is failing, like a roof, like we had to make changes, then we will consider a change. Does that answer the question?
I'm going to ask I think it does. I'm going to ask a related follow-up question, which is, you mentioned that there were several different metals used at the building in the screened-in porch. There was aluminum, bronze, steel. I was wondering if galvanic action played a role in the deterioration of some of those metals, and if that was a consideration in putting back the system.
I'm not really sure about that. The original were bronze, copper bronze, and that was what Gropius put in, and it immediately oxidized and just kept oxidizing, and it was, we actually even ended up spray painting them Gropius actually spray painted them several times, and then the decision was made sometime in the 70s. Somebody just made the decision and just went with aluminum, and that was that. Although I did consider replacing them with copper bronze, but they were so expensive, and for such spans, it would have cost thousands of dollars just for the netting. So we had to make a decision.
Thank you.
Go ahead, along those lines, on the metals, the gold sculpture, or it's gold wire sculpture, they replaced, I think the original was I think copper with the gold plating, and they introduced the silver wire with copper and zinc, I guess, the second time, and supposedly this will last a lot longer.
I'm going to ask another question because I don't see any other questions in the chat room, so I get to ask what I'm interested in. I know that there was a role that George Nakashima played at the Abbey, and he collaborated with Belluschi. Can you say a little bit more about that, Glenn? What did George Nakashima contribute to that project?
A lot of the built-in furniture and also loose furniture throughout the school actually was designed by Nakashima. So he collaborated with him on, I think, a number of his projects, and he brought him in along with Lippold from New York, and Nakashima was, I believe, in Pennsylvania. And and then working with Henry Lee Willett on the stained glass. So as far as, I don't know specifically how involved Nakashima was, other than I do know he designed most of the furniture that was built into the church, and then benches and so forth.
Interestingly, George Nakashima actually designed a very small chapel in New Mexico that I was able to visit, and it has a few of the features of the sort of high glass and the modern form. And if anyone in this session ever gets a chance to go, it's near it's near Santa Fe, but it's out in the middle of nowhere. There's a wonderful George Nakashima chapel.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. I was interested in the model that David O'Day created of the way in which the building would react to wind loading. I worked with David O'Day on the Martha's Vineyard Tabernacle, which is an open air structure, but it's a similar form, and it experienced similar deflection under wind loading to what the Abbey Chapel has experienced. So I was very interested to see that the two round forms were actually reacting similarly under wind loading, and we had to brace the tabernacle with cross bracing similar to what was done at Portsmouth Abbey. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is when he came up with the idea was, at first we weren't sure if it would be very visible and unattractive, but in reality, because I don't know if it's backlit or whatever, it seems to vanish when you look up there. And
did you put a mock-up in place to determine that would be the case?
Yeah, they did one, and then once was approved by the monks, because everything had to be approved by the monks. Yeah. And the interesting thing is Mike Madia, who was very integral project architect on it, we both were lobbying to not have the blue shade glass, storm glass put on, because it was very spectacular in there.
I'll bet.
Glass, yeah, but it's just too over the top for the monks, I think.
Well, it's a fabulous project. It looks really wonderful. Congratulations on that.
It was great to work on it. Yeah.
Congratulations on the Gropius House too. I'm going to have to take a field trip.
It's really amazing. Yeah, now we're just excited about going to see that.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions.
We do have a question in the question and answers.
Thank you. Question from Ludmilla. The question is, was there a need to preserve any aspects of the masonry in the chapel?
There was some repointing that was done, but believe it or not, the masonry was in rather good shape. So there are aspects of the church that really did not deteriorate as fast as certain other parts, and obviously the wind-driven rain and the movement of the dome was really the major deterioration.
Okay, so I do not see any other questions. Give folks a moment to submit any last questions. And I certainly want to thank our speaker. Those were two fascinating speakers. Those were two fascinating talks, and I certainly enjoyed them. I'm sure our audience did as well. So with that, I will thank everyone for participating in one of the final sessions of the Preservation Conference, and we all hope to see you all next year. Thanks,
I'd also like to encourage everyone to head to the Network Lounge if you'd like to continue discussion or put in some FaceTime with different members of the conference. And you can find the networking lounges out in the main tab under the lobby. So hope everyone has been enjoying the conference and hope to see you there.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.